Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You look
Welcome
beautiful.
back all.
Okay,
morning.
Good morning.
Or
Hi,
Good morning.
good morning. Carol, I just want to tell you just one thing. I don't think I ever received any of the nice, articles that Matt has talked about in the past. I don't recall ever getting anything.
We'll resend that email, okay?
Because I know you have my email address,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
okay, I appreciate that, thanks.
It was a terrific article, the last one.
Oh my God,
R.A. Bernstein. Yeah.
yes, that is a dear.
oh my God, what a beautiful gift. Oh, this is
Yes,
Proud
we
to have
have
my
a
son joining.
family guest joining us today, a dear
How are
Berkowitz.
you, Carolyn? How are you doing?
Great, good to see you.
You too.
Oh, dear, you look great. Oh my God, it's so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Welcome, my dear.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think many people have met you before, but probably a lot of them haven't seen you for many years.
Long time.
Uh,
Long. Like,
You just threw out your walking, talking dinosaur
You must
that
be,
your dad gave us.
oh gosh.
Should I go drag Molly out of bed?
Yes, yes,
Goodness.
yes.
It's never got me anywhere. Take my word.
Yeah, I'm sure, Shelley.
So welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to some of you. We are just really delighted to have another 5 sessions of this series scheduled on the calendar. So we thought, since some of you know each other, some of you don't know each other, we'll take a couple minutes at the beginning of these next 5 classes to to just introduce each other to each other. Just like 2 minutes. We thought maybe we'll start off with how did you get connected to JTS? Rabbi Berkowitz and I don't mind going first. So many of you know my connection to JTS isn't just professional, it's very personal. It was, and I can't believe it, almost 30 years ago that I met a JTS trained rabbi who gently turned me away 3 times when I called to ask about conversion to Judaism. And well, he did agree to preside over that process. And besides having children, it was really the best thing I ever did as an adult. I eventually came to work at B'nai Torah congregation as the rabbi's assistant. It was there that I met the professionals from JTS and came to be doing what I'm doing now. Personally, every major life event I have had, there's been an interaction with a JTS trained professional. It's really incredible as I think about it. My kids going to camp, funerals, shiva, weddings, bar mitzvahs. It's really been the honor of my life to participate in the community building that JTS alumni really do best. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this amazing work, and we're really glad that you're with us. Some of you don't know, I'm in Florida, in Parkland, and our office is located in Boca Raton. So good morning, Rabbi.
Thank you, Carolyn. So I'll just say very briefly that my connection to the Jewish Theological Seminary goes back about 27 years now to my first year as a student at JTS. And in so many ways, my journey to rabbinical school really began in my youth growing up in central New Jersey, but continued in a very, very powerful way when I was at Colgate University as an undergraduate, through my involvement with Jewish life at Colgate, and then the beginning of my rabbinical studies at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies right here in Jerusalem. So I feel like in so many ways, my journey comes full circle as I sit here at JTS's campus in Jerusalem, teaching Torah to you. And in so many ways, the Jewish Theological Seminary has inspired my journey in the Jewish world. I feel that when it comes down to it, it's the vision of JTS, which to me is a vision of pluralism, of deep, serious Torah that's immersed not only in a religious dimension of Torah and philosophy and theology, but also immersed in the history that we come out of and the various cultures that we come out of. To me, the Torah that is being taught at JTS is Torah Chesed. It's a Torah of loving kindness. There's a very, very beautiful story that I always love to share. When I began teaching for JTS, one of my first study groups was at Bloomberg. And the person that hosted the group, a lovely guy by the name of Ken Cooper, took me in to meet his boss, right? At that point, soon to be Mayor Mike Bloomberg. And when Mike Bloomberg was introduced to Rabbi Berkowitz, he wagged his finger at Rabbi Berkowitz and he said to me, you people, read clergy, are the cause of every conflict in this world. Right? To which I responded, with all due respect, the problem is not the message, the problem is the messenger. And you have yet to meet a good messenger. And thank God that was the end of the interaction with Mike Bloomberg. We both had smiles on our faces as we wrapped up our conversation. But I want to tell you that I completely understand where Mike Bloomberg was coming from when he said that too often, religion is the problem and not the solution. And I feel that the religion that is taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary is a religion that we need all over the world, not just in Judaism, but truly the world over. And that's what inspires my journey every day. And apart from that, it's learning with all of you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making this Zman Kadosh, this holy time in your lives, and to build community amongst us, this international Beit Midrash that we've created. Carolyn.
Thank you. If we have two people, maybe who want to introduce themselves today, Matt Weiss.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Matt Weiss. I guess my connection with JTS goes back way before I was born. My great-grandfather was the first president of the first conservative synagogue in Chicago, and he hired the first English-speaking rabbi. And somewhere, my dad said he had seen the letters between him and Solomon Schechter of how to convince the men to sit with the women. Then I grew up in the movement, went to Ramah, actually went and sat for an interview for the joint program at one point, and then for rabbinical school, and I realized I don't think the rabbinate was my calling. But years later, when I moved to Florida, I started attending classes with Matt, and have been a supporter and also helped found a conservative synagogue here in Boca.
Beautiful. Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Diane Wall.
We just one began, so I'll go more towards the middle. When I was more involved with Women's League back in the day, I had said to them, you know, I really would like a little bit more. I would like to be more involved. And so I cannot even remember who suggested and had suggested, you know, maybe you would like to be involved with Liz College. So that is where everything really began with Liz College. And when I got to know Shuli and we were talking, and then there was this new chancellor that was going to be coming in by the name of Ani Eisen. And I had gone and I was speaking with Carol Davidson. And then somehow we spoke about it. I said, you know, there's this beautiful Haggadah. You know, I'd like to know more about it, about the person. And I'm thinking of going on the JTS trip to meet the new chancellor. And then she told me, well, the wonderful artist, Matt Berkowitz, is also going to be on this mission. And in fact, I'm going to be having a phone call with him very soon. I said, oh, that's wonderful. I said, I really would like to purchase his Haggadah. And somehow I had a check with me, and I wrote out the check. And then I really got to know Matt on the trip, and the rest is history. So that's where I am today. And I feel very, very lucky to have become a part of Matt's family. And it's just been a wonderful journey at JTS. And I agree with everything that Matt said. It is a very, very special place of comfort and truly enjoying our history and Judaism. And it just makes one proud to be part of this incredible movement. So that's it.
Beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you,
you. And we'll
Diane.
take one more, Nancy.
I got to meet Matt first, and my first real experience with JTS was through a women's book class that we, of all things, we were reading Aviva Zornberg. And, if you've read any Aviva, you realize what an intensive class it was. It was a great group of women, many of whom were members of my synagogue, but some of whom were members of other synagogues locally here in Florida. And as I told Rabbi Matt, I was never one who could really do advanced math, but I believe that he could have taught me calculus and I would have understood it. And from there were many classes. Arvin, I remember well, our lunch and learns at your offices in West Boca. And Matt to me brought Jewish learning to life in a way that nobody else had. And I will always have incredibly fond memories of the Siyum that we went to in New York at JTS, and the visit to the library and seeing the Chumash from 1492, I don't remember its name now, but the famous book. And I still get chills when I think about the story of how that was smuggled out. And that is a visit that I will always carry with me, and my many hours of studying both Rabbi Matt Berkowitz and studying Talmud with Rabbi Miriam Berkowitz.
Very nice. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Nancy.
Thank you. All right. So next week we'll take a couple more. But thank you for those of us, those of you who shared with us now. Rabbi Berkowitz.
Thank you, Carolyn. There's a whole lot of history in this Beit Midrash, a whole lot of personal history with so many of you. So I'm especially grateful to be here with you in this space. And without further ado, Bruchim Habayim, an official welcome back to JTS's home in Jerusalem, the Shokin Institute, the Shokin Library, where I'm sitting right now. It's great to be back with all of you as we jump into this week's Parsha, Parashat Beshallah, right, which is famous for Kriyat Yam Suf, for the parting of the Reed Sea. So what I want to say as we jump in is that after 430 years of enslavement, one would think that the Israelites would enthusiastically embrace their newfound freedom, right? There would be great fervor in this embrace of freedom. But in reality, the exit and transition from enslavement to redemption are anything but smooth and uneventful. Beshallah presents us with a snapshot of the complexity that we're going to encounter essentially for the rest of Torah, the rest of the 5 books of Moses, as we journey forward. So what I want to say to you is, at best, the Israelites are reluctant to embrace their new reality. And at worst, they wax sentimental for enslavement in Egypt, right? And they want to return, right, to that place, to that crucible of their identity. So I've entitled this text study that we're going to be doing, Parashat Beshallah, the challenging embrace of freedom. So as we've done every week, I'm going to share screen, bring up the sources on screen. I'm sure a number of you had a chance to print them out as well. And we are ready to launch. Okay, hopefully you can all see this really well now. Okay, good. Okay, our first source, okay, right at the very, very beginning of this week's Parsha, from where the name of the Parsha comes from, Beshallah. Vayihi Beshallah Paro et ha'am v'lo nacham Elohim derech eretz plishtim ki karovu. Now, when Pharaoh let the people go, or literally when he sent the people away, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. So this is a very, very curious opening to this week's Parsha. One might think that God was intent on getting the people out of Egypt as quickly as possible and getting them to the promised land of Israel as soon as possible. But ultimately, we see from the opening of this Torah reading that it simply was not the case. What was the divine concern? What was God's concern as the people were coming out? Right? It's essentially what we were talking about before, right? God was deeply concerned that the people were going to have a change of heart. Let's turn to Rashi, the great medieval commentator. I've included 3 of his opening comments on this Torah reading. Right, the first, right, ki karofu, although it was nearer. So what does Rashi say here? V'noach lashuv be'oto haderech leMitzrayim, that it would have been easy for the Israelites to return on the same road back to Egypt, right? And that is why God takes them in this circuitous route. Right, the word that's used in Hebrew, and it's literally circuitous, vayesev Elohim et ha'am, that God took them in a roundabout way. Okay, so we're told that according to Rashi, right, Rashi putting words in God's mouth here, that the concern was that it would have been too easy to return by the same way back to Egypt, right? And then take a look at this next comment of Rashi's. He writes, Berotam milchama, right, on the phrase that when they see war, if they had traveled by the direct route, they would have returned to Egypt. If even when God led them round by an indirect route, they said, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt, which is a quote from Sefer Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers, Parashat Shlach Lecha, then how much more so if God had led them by a direct route. Okay, again, reinforcing this notion, right, that they had to go by the indirect route, right? And here the concern is, right, lest they see war and want to go back. Okay, the third comment of Rashi's, which you see here in number 4, pen yenachem, okay, lest they have a change of heart. And then Rashi says, Yachshavu machshava al sheyitzu v'yitnu lev lashuv. They will think a thought about the fact that they left Egypt and will set their minds on returning back to the place. Right? So what is the logic of God's thinking about the people? What is the great concern in your own words? Riva.
You're muted, Riva. And then Joel.
Of course I'm muted. First of all, the people didn't know how to be free. They were born in slavery, and that's what was familiar to them. They knew how to be slaves. It's frightening when you change your total existence.
Exactly right. Even if ultimately it's an improvement, even if ultimately it's for the good, it's terrifying, as you're pointing out, Riva. Joel.
Yeah, I was basically going, excuse me, I was basically going to say the same thing. I think it's just a recognition of what human behavior is like. People get used to where they are, even if the outside observer looks at this and goes, well, that was hell that you were living in. Why didn't you leave? They were used to where they were. They leave, and then it's like, oh, okay, we're not really sure what's going on here. So the first thing they do with any confrontation is turn around and go back where they were. In modern times, you saw the same phenomenon when the concentration camps were liberated. There were many of the inmates who literally refused to leave. They had no idea who these soldiers were. They didn't know the difference between German soldiers and American soldiers. And they said, we don't know who you are. This place was hell. We're staying here. So it's just, it's nature.
Right. Very good, Joel. Right. As strange as it seems, like you just said, it's human nature. Shelley.
I thought Joel was headed in a whole different direction. And I think I'm going to take it more of if we criticize their willingness to turn back, we have to think about in our own lives, how many times we've been in a really bad situation and nothing moves us out of this bad situation. It's all about, how do we change? We may be in a extremely bad marriage, yet we stay in a bad marriage. And why do we do it? And then when we leave, we may regret initially. I don't think you need to go to something as extreme as a concentration camp. I think that we have to be very careful and look at this and the decisions we make in life and wonder what makes us so afraid of change that we would stay in a situation, even in our own lives, and not move forward as the Israelites were choosing not to move forward. And what is keeping our feet in that clay, that we can't improve our own lives and risk the fear, risk the wilderness, as they say, of something unknown. What unknown could be so bad that we would stay in a bad situation?
Very good, Shelley. Thank you.
Nancy?
Having worked with victims of domestic violence and people who've been in long-term physically abusive relationships, you only have a little while to understand that from the outside, you say, this is horrible. How could you possibly stay? And yet a very large percentage go back several times for ever leaving, and some of them never do leave. And it is, as Joel said, it is human nature. The devil, as bad as the situation is, you have developed certain coping skills. There is a certain predictiveness to the unpredictability of the situation you're in, but it's a limited set of possibilities. And the fear of the unknown, change, although the promise is of a better life, these are very concrete operational people. They couldn't see, they don't have the imagination to look into possibilities that to them are completely foreign. And I was right. You got to lead them around so that it is impossible to go back. And of course, he ends up deciding, you know what, we got to, the whole generation's got to die out because these people are always going to want to go back. So we have to
Nancy,
eliminate.
You took the words right out of my mouth, which is, first of all, better the devil that you know than the one you don't know. Okay, I think that works perfectly when we're talking about the situation of the Israelites and the ambivalence that they express in their leaving Egypt, right? And not only that, what you said, Nancy, about, a certain predictability of one's life, even if you're dealing with tension and abuse and, essentially, destructiveness and loss all around you. Right. One of, there are so many examples that we can give of this. Historically, I'm thinking of the Jews of Germany who were so reticent to give up their lives and move, or Jews wherever they were, right? So reticent, they saw the writing on the wall very, very clearly, right? But could not break the bonds of the life that they knew, right? Their roots were so, so deep. And there's a great fear of what the future is going to bring. Like what was said before, you develop, certain coping mechanisms.
Arvin, then Larry Goldberg.
Okay, I'm not going to talk anymore. Okay.
Doesn't this issue raise the question, who is spearheading the Exodus and why? Going back, you don't have, and I can't recall, outcries from the enslaved. The movement is being led by Moses, and is it the attempt that for God to fulfill a promise that he made that you will be free? Is there a hue and cry from the people to get out? I understand the fact that they're concerned about the unknown, but who is forcing the Exodus?
Okay, so Arvin, I'm going to direct you to the end of the second chapter of the book of Exodus. Take a look at the very, very end, and there you have the cry of the people rising up from under their oppression. Okay, now it doesn't say that the people are crying for freedom, but it talks about their cry under the oppression that they were experiencing in Egypt, and God hears that cry. Okay, it's very, very interesting. It's a moment in the Exodus story that's often overlooked, right? And when you read the Haggadah, we often simply, credit God with the redemptive process. But Emil Fackenheim, Zichrono Livracha, one of the great Jewish philosophers of the 20th century, writes that it's actually the Israelites that take the first step in the redemptive process, right? It's the Israelites, because of their cry, which rises up to God, and God hearing that cry, that God makes the decision to enter history and take them out. But the question that you're asking is, it's a very, very worthy question of, who is pushing the process along? Is it God? Is it the Israelites? Is it Moses? Is it Pharaoh? And at different moments of the story, right, it's different, right? Who the parties are that are pushing for redemption.
And I think, Rabbi, that cry out is something you have really beautifully illustrated in your Haggadah, right?
Yes, that's one of my paper cuts.
Right.
Diane.
That's something I figured I wasn't going to say anything because so many thoughts have already come through. I'm sorry that I don't remember the gentleman's name who was speaking also about the concentration camps, because that is what I thought about also. But when you say the cry, how many centuries did we have to cry for? And the whole thing is, they also became to, I guess, to a point that they couldn't do things on their own. So even though they hated their abuser, in a way they also trusted, because they knew what their lives were day after day after day. And then here comes this incredible young man, someone that they don't know, who's performing all these great, things, and he's trying to tell them, don't worry, God is with you. But they're afraid. Why should I trust somebody who all of a sudden is coming out of nowhere, when where was God all these centuries before? And will things truly be better, or will there be another enemy for us that will overtake us?
Right, and not only that, Diane, I just want to add to what you said. He was coming out of Pharaoh's palace, and he looked Egyptian. So all the more reason, why would they trust somebody like this? Why would they trust Moshe? So when you think about that background, that would also put doubts in their mind as well.
Larry Goldberg, then Naomi. Oh, you're muted, Larry.
To reiterate, it's not only the devil but they were taken care of after a fashion. And as everybody said, they were taken care of, and they knew what their life was going to be like. Freedom really requires choices and decisions, and they weren't equipped to make those kind of decisions. It brings to mind when we've traveled sometimes in former Soviet Union countries. One time, I think we were in Croatia, one of our guides said how wonderful it was under Tito. Everybody had a job, everybody had a place to live, everybody was taken care of in spite of the oppression, but they knew where their meals were coming from, they knew where their shelter was coming from, and this whole new business of freedom and capitalism, people work and people had to scramble and people had to do things to make decisions about their lives, which was probably a very similar situation.
Right, great point. So even in the midst of the insecurity, there was still security. It was
Yes.
the predictability that we were talking about. So I need to invoke my rabbinic authority so we can move on in the sources. Please, if you have a comment, hold on to it and we will get to it. So I'm going to share screen. We're going to move on to source number 5 now. Just give me one moment. Here we are. Okay, source number 5. Now we are approaching the Reed Sea or the Red Sea. Okay, it is literally the Reed Sea, Yam Suf. Okay, and as we approach the Reed Sea, the Israelites are complaining. Now, we completely understand God's concern at this point, that the way out is also potentially the way back. And it's not just a cry of fright that we hear from the Israelites, but their words drip with sarcasm. Okay, listen to what the Israelites say in Exodus 14, verses 11 through 12. And they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness'?" Now look at what Nechama Leibovich, one of the great teachers of Torah from Jerusalem, says here, based on this particular verse. She writes the following: "Scarcely redeemed from the toils of slavery, they saw their former country of adoption through rose-colored spectacles. Egypt was still the land of graves, but better to be buried in the graves of a familiar country than to die in the unknown. They looked to the future with trepidation. The future was epitomized in a 4-letter Hebrew word, midbar, wilderness, which occurs twice in their grumblings as compared with the 5-fold repetition of Egypt they hankered after." Okay, very, very interesting point, that when you go up to the verse that we just read, right, and simply look at the number of times that midbar is mentioned, right, it's only twice, but the number of times that Egypt is mentioned is 5 times. Right, so the verse itself is conveying that connection, right, that longing of going back to Beit Avadim, to the house of slavery. And then finally in this section, look at what Aviva Zornberg, had to throw that in for Nancy. Look at what Aviva Zornberg writes. Nancy and Shelley here. "The radical nature of their doubt is revealed perhaps most abrasively in their use of the word, the word good to describe Egyptian slavery, and to embed it in a fatalistic view of the narrative, which already, hardly begun, is to end in the desert sands. Their thought represents a serious attempt to make sense of events. When they say, for instance, 'Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt?' we wonder, when did they ever say this? There's no record of such a protest in earlier chapters of Torah. In this case, their fear harks back to Moses' complaints that the people would not believe his message. The people's sarcasm at the sea seems to justify Moses' earlier sarcasm about them." Okay, comments on what we just read or questions? There was a whole lot there.
Naomi, I see your hand is up. I'm not sure if it's from the previous interaction or if you wanted to comment now. Okay.
Right, what is Aviva Zornberg saying here?
Just remind me of
Shelley?
what Moses's earlier sarcasm was, would you please?
Sure. What she's referring to, what she's alluding to here is when Moses expresses doubt to God, right? And asks God, remember when God appears to Moses at the burning bush, Moses pushes back on a number of levels. And one of the levels that he pushes back on is he said, why should this people trust me? Why should they believe me? Okay, so that's the sarcasm that Aviva Zornberg is referring to here. So in a way, it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that ultimately what he feared is happening right now, right? These people simply, what a time to figure that out. He's with them, they're headed, out of Egypt finally, and they really don't trust him, right? They see what it is that they're facing and they're terrified. So that's what she's alluding to here. Right, she's saying essentially that they need the space. They need the physical space. They need the head space in which to be able to work out their understanding of what is happening to them. Okay, and that's going to take time, right? We know it's going to end up taking about 40 years before we truly understand what it is that's happening to us. Right? And ultimately, that generation is going to die out in the desert, right? But it shows you that you can't make a sudden transition in your life without processing what that transition means, right? And that's part of what God is doing in constructing the route that the Israelites are going to journey on. It's this understanding that they can't take the shortest route, right, to get to the destination. The Israelites are going to need to understand that the essence of what they're going through is the journey itself, right? It's going to be the tachanot, the stations all along the way. Susan.
We need you to unmute, Susan, sorry.
We see things like that even today when we try to introduce Western democracy into less developed countries.
Iraq. Look at what went on in Iraq.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Right. They try to chase us out. They start a war to protect their lack of democracy. They don't welcome it when it's offered to them, and they don't welcome assistance in converting to it. It's a very hard decision to make.
Right. No, very, very well said. And it's a perfect case that speaks to the point that we're talking about. Shelley.
So I like to be able to project things in my own life with what's going on here. And Aviva Zornberg is always into the psychological. We learn that these are the biggest stressors in life. And biggest stressor in life, one of the biggest one is moving. We move from one house to another, and somehow we make a huge deal out of it. We move from one country to another. That would not be even, you did it, but would any of us do it? When Jews arrived at this country, they got to New York, which is always amazing to me. And how many ventured forth farther west? I ask myself all the time, would I be a wagon train person, or would I be in a tenement and be happy to have made it this far? And the answer for most of my life was, I'd stick to the tenement. There's no way in hell I'm going to risk going into a covered wagon. And at the time, we call them Native Americans now, that was part of my nightmares, to be a part of that. So as human beings, psychologically, we are not prepared to turn on a dime. And Moses was they were forced to turn on a dime. And
I want you to know, Shelley, you're speaking to the heart of somebody that's sitting in this Beit Midrash right now, and that is Adir Berkowitz, right? And Adir can talk a whole lot about this experience of, right, being uprooted against his will. And I think Adir definitely resonates with the emotions that the Israelites were feeling. But I love how you're making that connection to what it is to move.
And there's a shift. There's a shift. And speaking again of my divorce, which happened many, many years ago, and I just want to assure everybody who doesn't know me that my life is wonderful. Now, I went from not wanting to leave a very bad situation, being forced to leave because I'm not the one who asked for the divorce, desperately being angry at my therapist for saying that this is a good idea. And I hated the therapist because she was the Moses and saying life will be better, making her promise that I would meet someone else, to shifting into a place where it is better to be alone than be in an unhappy place. So that shift comes over a very long period of time.
Right,
so for me to look at this, it is hard for me to understand it because this is so much worse, but I can move myself in that direction.
Right, and it all goes back to what Joel was saying at the beginning of our class, that this is deeply human, right? There is no question about it. As strange as it seems, right? It rubs us the wrong way. We think of, 400 years of enslavement and they don't want to get out, and look at how ungrateful they are. But the bottom line is, when we think back to our own personal journeys, like you're pointing out, Shelley, there are moments that we look back and we say, there I was, the Israelite, complaining in the desert. That is me. And it helps us empathize more with what our ancestors went through as they left. I want to take you into another snapshot of the conflicting feelings that the Israelites had as we go to the Reed Sea here. This one of my favorite midrashim that I'm pulling up now from Mechilta Beshallah. The Israelites are literally standing on the shores of the Reed Sea. Moses is there praying, not quite sure what's going to happen now. And Moses cries out to God. And then God says to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." And then this wonderful midrash that reads between the lines of what happened at that very moment. It is taught that Rabbi Meir said, when the Israelites stood at the Red Sea, the tribes were vying with one another, one saying, "I will be the first to go into the sea," and the other saying, "I will be the first to go into the sea." As they stood there wrangling, the tribe of Benjamin sprang forward and went down first into the sea. For this reason, Benjamin won the privilege of becoming host for God in the Holy of Holies. Right? So this midrashic reading is telling us that the Israelites were overly enthusiastic about leaving Egypt. Right? And not only that, they were fighting over who would be the first to dip their foot into the Reed Sea, right, and begin the crossing. Now, look at the opposite opinion, right, the polar opposite. Rabbi Judah said to Rabbi Meir, that was not quite the way it happened. In fact, one tribe said, "I will not be the first to go into the sea." And another tribe said, "I will also not be the first to go into the sea." While they were standing there arguing, Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, of the tribe of Judah, sprang forward and was the first to go into the sea. Because it was Nachshon, Judah was to obtain a royal dominion in Israel. So the second opinion that we have here is of extreme fear, right? Trepidation, right? That, by the way, is where this, classic expression that we have in Jewish tradition has, when you hear somebody ask, who wants to be the Nachshon, right? It's who wants to be the first to jump into the water? Who wants to be the brave soul, right? That volunteers, that's proactive, that steps forward. This is where it comes from, this particular midrash, that we believe Nachshon is the first Israelite to jump. So what do you think? Do you believe that it's more the first opinion of the Midrash or the second opinion of the Midrash?
Nancy?
As a mother, it's definitely number two. Not me. Oh, not me. No, 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 no. Yeah, I'm buying that they were like, they're already like skeptical. And now you want us to do what? Wait. I think it makes a lot more sense that while they deciding who wasn't going to do it, one person decided, to heck with all of you. I'm just going to go because one person, Nachshon, had already made up his mind. I ain't ever going back. Whatever his backstory was, the pain of change was less than the pain of staying the same for Nachshon. And he was ready.
Good. By show of hands, how many of you agree with Nancy here? How many of you agree with Nancy's perspective, right? That it was this overwhelming sense of fear and nobody wanted, good, okay. Someone want to express the other
Can
point
I just
of view?
ask a question? Okay.
Sure. Like I'm going to stop you,
Well,
Shelley.
well, no, the question is a frustration again that I learned the Nachshon story. That was the emet, and I told that story and taught that story as if it was written in not, and I'm assuming now after all these years that it's written in this, right? This is where
It's Midrash. It's
okay.
Midrash.
No
yes,
longer will I
yes,
tell this
yeah.
story.
No. Tell the story, but quote the Midrash now.
Without giving the other side of it, I can't give the story as fact. It's not in the Torah, right?
Yes, but it's part of our oral Torah. It's part of the oral tradition. So I believe just so long as you give credit where credit is due, it's okay. Riva, just take yourself off mute.
Yeah, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, and I'm not sure I believe this, but people tend to be competitive for one thing. And for another, they may have had the sense that the Egyptians had a change of heart and were coming after them. And here they are standing before the sea. So do I want to be scared by the Egyptians when they reach us where we have no place to go? Or do I want to continue to plunge forward with hope?
Right, excellent. Right, you can imagine the fear sort of looking at the expanse of the water in front of them, right? And then the desert behind that, they don't know what's in front of them, right? It's a matter of faith, to move forward. Diane?
This might be totally away from everything. When they were first saying, if I recall, you had the ones that were fighting over who would go first.
Yes, right.
Like, and they were talking about the tribes. Like, if I go first, that means that my tribe is the best, the strongest, the most fearless. And if I go there first and we settle in a place, we will be the leaders along with Moses. We will be the ones that will direct the others who were fearful, because apparently from the beginning of time, everybody likes the power. They like to be number one.
Right. Very, very interesting. Right. That's a great way of embracing the other perspective here. Right. I tend to think that the overwhelming feeling was fear, but perhaps it was ego that was pushing them forward at this point. Let's go back into the sources and we will move forward into the sea here. The sea of interpretation, that is. And after they cross the Reed Sea, right, we encounter the next complaint. Now remember, everything that I'm showing you is in the same Parsha. It's in this week's Parsha, Beshallah. Okay, so in the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. Right? In other words, better to have a full stomach and be enslaved, right, than to be free and to be hungry, right, to be living with that uncertainty. Aviva Zornberg comments on this. A month exactly after leaving Egypt, the people again complain. this time of hunger. Here they escalate the absurdity of their narrative. It would have been better to die with full stomachs in Egypt than to starve in the wilderness. Whatever else can be said about their Egyptian experience, one thing is clear: not to leave Egypt would have been better than to leave, right? And then it's not just hunger, but it's also thirst, right? They complain here, give us water to drink, they said. And Moses replied to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you try the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? Aviva, indeed, we might say that God has set aside for them a kind of academic space in which to do their thinking. For this activity to be innocuous, they need the protection of the vast wilderness so that acting on their thoughts becomes too complicated to be realistic. Their crooked road into the wilderness gives them a freedom to think, to ask their subversive, sarcastic questions. It gives them also the outrageous freedom to zigzag, not only geographically, but intellectually and emotionally. Now you're free to jump in. Joel.
Yeah, well,
And Toby.
these people do a lot of fetching. I mean, well, A, they're Jews, so I mean, of course, but the other issue is, I think you need to put this into the context of, if you think about the end of the Shirat, when they finally get to the other side and all the women are dancing with Miriam, it's not just, oh, thank God we're here. They were really rejoicing in great detail over how the Egyptians died in the water when the water came crashing over them. These are not exceptionally empathic people or empathetic people. They're, and it very likely it's because of the experiences that they had. And, and again, I forget the name of the gentleman that said that, living in Croatia under Tito, they didn't learn any skills. These people have no skills. They don't have the skill set to direct their own lives. So they sit there and they kvetch and they go, what have you, oh, you brought us out here to die. I think that it's very understandable in that context.
Right, definitely. They're acting in a very, very pediatric sort of way. Right? There's a deep immaturity to their behavior, and perhaps that's, again, a very natural human response to, worrying about, the bare minimum, the physical needs that you have. Toby?
Yeah, I know we always criticize the Israelites for the kvetching, but some of the kvetching was actually justified. I mean, yes, it's true that God had brought them through the Sea of Reeds, but if they truly do not have water and do not have food, not only for themselves, but for their children that they brought, as they didn't have a choice, so much more did their children not have a choice, as you pointed out about a deer earlier, and their flocks, and they're worried. And, I think that that's not unreasonable. And I'm thinking about the people, I just recently read a couple of books talking about the people who make remarkable treks through danger, whether it was in World War II, people in the resistance, or migrants coming from Mexico and Latin America. But they're the ones who took the initiative and made the choice to do it. And those are the exceptional people who, through desperation, say anything is better than where I am. But
good. Well said. Well said. Philip.
Hi. Two separate comments. The first, going back to the tribes versus Nachshon. that you could also, if you wanted perhaps, to see it as not contradictory, but rather a similar, that both are trying to do the same thing. It reminds me of being at a meeting where everybody really wants to do the right thing, and the talk just goes in circles, round and round and round. But everybody wants to jump in, but they don't. It's in their mind. It's not in action. Nachshon puts it into action, and that's what differentiates him. He goes for it. But it's not a negativity. The other people really want to do the right thing, so-called, but they just can't convert what's in the mind into physical action. The second part, dealing with what we just read, maybe this is confrontational a little bit, but it's reminding me a little bit about the Rabbi in Hasidic circles. How many of us would go and follow the quote unquote the Rebbe's voice, and this is what I am going to do, and not complain? I have a feeling that most people on this call would have a problem with that kind of relationship with the leadership of the people.
Thank you. All excellent points. Naomi.
Well, I have been thinking sort of tangentially and toying with this thought toward this wonderful discussion that we've all had, which has been very enlightening. But I sort of going on a tangent, and I'm thinking of the appearance of risk takers in civilization, because there are people who are very different. They stand out. They have been sort of the entrepreneurial spice in the life of the world. I think that it's something of a mutation, perhaps, if you want to call it a God-given gift. I'm not quite sure that it is inherited, but there is a difference in certain people in which they are willing to take steps which everybody else is going to be afraid of. And these, in many cases, have been the leaders of our society. I'm even thinking about what drives our stock market today, for the good or for bad. I think it's not exactly on point, and that's why I'm sort of hesitant to bring it up. But
Very
I think
good, Naomi. Naomi, you just gave me a perfect segue into the last source that I want to share with you, and then I'll bring us back into the comment space. So those of you who have a comment, hold on to it. We will get to your comments. The last source that I bring here, Naomi was talking about entrepreneurial spirit, right? And certainly when we think of entrepreneurial spirit, we think of the chalutzim. We think of the pioneers that came to the land of Israel, right? Pre-state times, right? In the early part of the last century. And one of the most famous of those chalutzim is Rachel, okay? Her full name is Rachel Bluestein, okay? But she's referred to in Israel as, if you just say Rachel without any family name attached to it, everyone knows who you're talking about. And that is Rachel HaMishoreret, right? It's Rachel, the poetess, right? There is no other Rachel in Israel. She is very, very famous. She is buried right by the Kinneret. A number of you sitting in this group were on an Israel mission with me, either one or two Israel missions, where we went to that Kinneret cemetery, right? And we stood before her grave. She's buried, and Naomi Shemer is buried right next to her, one of the most beautiful spots in the country. So I want to share this poem that she wrote in 1929. She had a very, very tragic life. She was born in Russia in 1890. She grew up in the Ukraine, and she passed away in 1931. It seems that on a journey back to Europe, after she was in Israel, she went back to Europe, to France. She was studying agriculture there. It seems she contracted tuberculosis. And when she came back and she was officially diagnosed, she became a navinad. She became a wanderer. The kibbutz would not let her back in northern Israel. And so she really became a wanderer in the country. So listen to this poem that she writes. It's entitled, Hoi Artsi, O my land. O my land, my parent, why is your landscape so blighted and gloomy? The memory of a stepmother land imperceptibly creeps into the heart, right? And there she's talking about the land of Israel. Now listen to her talking about the memory of a stepmother land. At this point, she's talking about Ukraine. Upon the hillside, the sprightly fir tree, on the plain, the ancient oak, on the slopes, on the shores of the stream, the birch maidens in their Shabbat garb. The arm of the sun is too short to cast its fiery lance into the heart of the forest. A whole day in the abode of the pines, scented darkness and a dream. And now, the last stanza, we return to the land of Israel. O my mother, surely we yearn for you. Surely we will claim your abuse from God. And as in former times, you will again spread fragrance and shade over those stricken by your noontime heat. Okay, so why did I bring this to you? Right, why did we read the words of Rachel, right, one of the most famous of the Chalutzim? Right, here she was coming to Toby. Take yourself off mute and tell us.
Well, because she is writing beautifully about Ukraine, which is the place that she had to leave. And Israel is still a harsh place, but then at the end, she sees that it will become, once again, a beautiful and welcoming place.
Excellent, 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 right? Here, she is sitting in the land of Israel, in the promised land. And what is she doing? She's waxing sentimental for the old country. She's waxing sentimental for the fish pots, as it were, of Ukraine. And why did she leave Ukraine? She left Ukraine because of the persecution that every single moment of every single day that she was there. What did she experience? Right? This is the story of our people, right? It was the old country that spit her out, and she came to Israel to find a new life, the Zionist hope, the Zionist, and even with that, right, she still felt the pull back, right? And I feel that establishes this very, very beautiful connection, this very, very beautiful parallel with what it is we see of the Israelites here in Beshallah. So I want to give some of you the last word that had your hands up.
No.
Shelley and then Larry.
Okay, so on the heels of that, I just want to say that if you read the book, there's a book that has the letters that people wrote starting in the 1800s and up till 19 something to the forward, people who had come from other countries.
The Biddle Brief?
The Biddle, right. It is just exactly what Rachel wrote about. But what I was going to bring up is, I was going to bring up these inoculations, these immunizations. And I was thinking about, they say that there were 600,000 people, Israelites, that left. So they were in this, that was a vast number. And they were looking for water and food, and they didn't have it. And it wasn't a small group, it was a large number that needed their needs met. And when you think about the way that people are responding right now to getting this immunization, these vaccines, and the terror, the anxiety involved in getting, I don't know what it's like in Israel, but I know what it's like here. You know, give it to me already, you know. And it reminds me of the sense of the struggle, the one person against another, the pitting of this basic need, which is considered a basic need today, and how people can't get it, and they're angry and upset about it. So it reminds me of the situation in Egypt.
Excellent, very, very good. Larry?
Yeah, to go back to Zornberg's source about there needing this safe space, it sort of resonates in terms of human behavior. Frequently when people are angry, they're more likely to lash out at people they love, people they know, because they know that they'll be loved anyway. But they may have anger and they may have expressions of frustration, but they don't usually express those frustrations to the people they should, but rather to the people that they know it's safe to express those feelings to. Though angry, children will be angry at their parents and they'll lash out. And that's the same thing with the Israelites. It was a safe space. They were in the desert. They know that Moses took them out. They know that that there's that they're sort of being taken care of, although they sort of yearn for Israel. But it's a safe space for them to work this thing through in terms of their anger and their frustration and their anxiety and they're frightened.
Very nice. They were doing it within the context of family. So indeed it was safe. Toby?
Yeah, just to build on what Larry just said, the other way in which it was safe is that they couldn't act on what they were saying. So they could say, oh, I want to go back to Egypt, but practically speaking, that wasn't an option, so that they could get out all of their, oh, you know, I want to go back to Egypt, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then it was basically venting because they couldn't do what they were saying they would like to do. And had they been on the direct road, they could have just turned around and gone back. But now there was wilderness and the Sea of Reeds between them and what they supposedly were yearning for.
Yeah, very beautiful. That's you know, it was a blessed moment just to get it off of their chest, just to be able to articulate it, get it out of their heart, get it off of their shoulders, right? And to be able to say it, right? They didn't actually have to do it, right, to run back, but it was enough to be able to express that. Essentially that is ultimately what ends up liberating them and allows them to move forward. Carolyn.
Well, we have come to the end of an hour. Rabbi, thank you so much for your teaching, and thanks to all of you for your enthusiastic participation. We're trying to give everybody a chance to talk, so thank you for being patient. Really delighted with this class. Again, I want to bring your attention to the JTS website, coming events and classes. This past Monday, our community education program was really incredible. 720 people on the line learning a little Talmud. Watch your email. You'll get a follow-up to this class, which will have a link to both the taped version and also to some of the upcoming events. One I think Rabbi Berkowitz is going to tell you about now. And again, we'll be back for this class again next Thursday morning. And a few more people will tell us how they got connected to JTS. Thank you. Rabbi?
So I do want to say that this hour always goes by way too quickly. And the magic of this, you know, there are so many learning opportunities for you to take advantage of, as Carolyn is pointing out. But certainly in a lecture of 700 people, you're not going to be able to have this kind of interaction. So I treasured this interaction. And for me, that's where the Torah with a capital T happens. It's in the conversation, the contributions that we all make as we're exploring the text together. So I just want to give a quick ad for February 10th, 1 p.m. Eastern, February 10th. Yossi Klein Halevi is going to be talking about Israeli music during the time of Corona. It's going to be a fabulous, fabulous talk. If you've never heard Yossi speak, I know this is in his main endeavor, but his great passion, other than commenting on politics and philosophy and theology, his great passion is Israeli music. And he speaks with so much love much soul, and I really encourage all of you to tune into that. Again, 1 p.m. Eastern time on February 10th. Next time we meet, I'll remind you again. And just wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom, Israel. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Shavua Tov, everybody.